I never imagined a small moment of carelessness would ignite something I could no longer ignore. My life had grown stale, predictable, almost scripted. Married for nearly a decade, I had fallen into routines that left me feeling invisible in my own home. My husband barely looked up from his phone anymore, our conversations were reduced to logistics, and affection had been absent for longer than I cared to admit. I told myself it was normal, that marriages evolve, but deep down, I craved to be noticed again. That craving became the perfect crack for temptation to slip through. It happened on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. I had slipped into a skirt I hadn't worn in years, shorter than what I'd usually put on these days, but I wasn't dressing for anyone in particular. It was just one of those impulsive moments when you want to remind yourself you're still capable of feeling attractive. I was tidying around the house, humming quietly to myself, when the knock on the door startled me. Standing there was my neighbor, someone younger, confident, always a little too charming for his own good. He had come over to borrow a tool, nothing remarkable, but the way his eyes traveled over me made me suddenly aware of the hemline grazing my thighs. His gaze lingered and I felt it like static in the air. He didn't say anything inappropriate, but the way he smirked, as if he had caught me off guard, left my chest tight. That brief pause before I handed him what he needed felt heavier than it should have. I laughed awkwardly, brushing it off, but my mind betrayed me. For the first time in so long, I felt the thrill of being seen. Not just seen, but studied, appreciated, maybe even desired. I tried to shake it off, reminding myself it was innocent. But when he left, I caught myself replaying that look. My body betrayed me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. It was confusing, a mixture of guilt and exhilaration, and yet I couldn't stop myself from wondering if he had thought about me after leaving. Later that day, I saw him outside working on his car, shirt clinging to his back from the heat. Our eyes met across the driveway, and a smirk pulled at his lips again. I quickly looked away, but inside, something stirred. The days that followed became a quiet tug-of-war in my head. I told myself it was harmless, just a silly rush from a fleeting glance. Still, I caught myself dressing differently when I knew I might see him. Subtle changes, lip gloss, a fitted top, that same skirt once more. Each decision whispered by a part of me I thought had been buried under years of neglect. It wasn't that I had fallen for him. It was that he made me feel alive, awake, as though someone had lit a spark under the ashes of my dull routine. It escalated in small ways. Casual greetings stretched into longer conversations. He'd lean against the fence, smiling, asking about my day, and listening in a way that made me feel like my words mattered. He teased lightly, a playful edge to his tone that made me blush in spite of myself. I told myself it was just friendliness, but there was an undercurrent neither of us acknowledged. I felt the pull every time we parted, the quiet ache of wanting more of that attention. Inside my home, the contrast became unbearable. My husband barely noticed when I changed my hair, when I bought a new dress, when I tried to initiate conversations that went deeper than who would handle the bills. He wasn't cruel, just distant, a man lost in his own world. And I, standing in the silence he left behind, realized how starved I was. That was the dangerous part. Once you realize you're starving, every taste of sweetness feels like salvation. The neighbor caught me again one afternoon when I was watering plants outside. My skirt fluttered in the breeze, and I felt his eyes on me before I even turned. He came over to ask some trivial question about lawn care, but his grin told me his question wasn't really the point. The air between us tightened, charged. I found myself laughing too easily, leaning closer than necessary, my pulse betraying the cool mask I tried to keep. He noticed. I could tell by the way his expression shifted, more serious, more intense, like he was reading me and finding answers I didn't mean to reveal. When he left that day, I stood frozen on the porch, heart racing, skin tingling as if I had been touched, though he never laid a finger on me. I told myself this was the line I wouldn't cross, but the thought of him lingered deep into the night. Lying next to my husband, who snored softly without stirring when I shifted, I realized how wide the gulf between us had become. I wanted to believe this was just harmless fun, but the honesty of my body betrayed me. I wanted more. I tried distancing myself, avoiding situations where we might cross paths. I convinced myself that cutting off the small moments of interaction would solve the problem. But fate, or maybe just poor timing, had other plans. One evening, I stepped out to throw away the trash, and he was there, leaning against his car, phone in hand. He looked up, and that grin, God, that grin, pulled me right back into the current I had tried so hard to resist. We exchanged a few words, nothing extraordinary, but the unspoken weight behind each one made my skin prickle. I walked back inside, and for the first time, I admitted to myself this wasn't innocent anymore. Something had shifted irreversibly. I wanted the attention, the thrill, the rush of being seen not as someone's spouse, not as a tired version of myself, but as a woman worth looking at. That realization sat heavy in my chest, equal parts terrifying and intoxicating. I knew I was standing at the edge of a cliff, one more step away from a decision that could unravel everything. Yet deep down, part of me wondered if I had already taken that first step without realizing it. I told myself I could manage it, that as long as nothing physical happened, I wasn't doing anything wrong. But that was a lie. I fed myself to sleep better at night. The truth was that emotional lines had already been crossed. Every time I glanced at my phone, I secretly wished for a message from him, even though he had never sent one. Every casual conversation we shared lingered in my mind longer than it should have. I couldn't deny it anymore. I wanted him to notice me more directly. The chance came sooner than I expected. One evening, my husband was away on a work trip, and I was left alone in the house. I stepped outside to grab the mail, and there he was again, leaning casually on his porch. He called out, asked how I was doing, and before I realized it, I was standing there talking with him in the fading light. Our words seemed ordinary on the surface, but the way he looked at me stripped them of their innocence. His eyes didn't wander in the way of someone being careless. They lingered in a way that made me feel like he was memorizing me. I should have walked away, but I stayed. My laughter came too easily. My voice lowered unconsciously, as though sharing secrets even when I wasn't. He made a teasing remark about how I always seemed to look brighter these days, and I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. The pause that followed his words stretched too long, and when our eyes met, I felt my chest tighten. Nothing was said outright, but everything was understood. That moment left me restless the entire night. The following week, the small interactions grew heavier. When we passed each other outside, he leaned closer than before. His words carried an edge that wasn't just playful, but suggestive. I responded with little comments of my own, careful not to say too much, yet unable to stop myself from feeding into the tension. I became aware of how my voice softened around him, how I smiled wider, how I lingered longer in his presence than with anyone else. These weren't accidents, they were choices, and I knew it. The first real boundary snapped during an unexpected encounter. It was raining hard, and I had rushed outside to pull in some cushions before they got soaked. He appeared from nowhere, offered to help, and before I could refuse, we were both there in the downpour, grabbing things in a frantic mess. We stumbled back inside my doorway, dripping wet, laughing at the chaos. But the laughter died quickly. The closeness, the sound of his breathing, the electricity between us, it silenced everything else. My hand brushed against his when I reached for a towel, and I froze. He didn't pull back. Neither did I. The air thickened, time seemed to pause, and then his hand lingered just long enough on mine to send a jolt through my entire body. I knew this was the point of no return, the invisible line I had sworn I wouldn't cross, and yet I didn't move away. His eyes held mine, steady and intense, and in that charged silence, we both acknowledged what had been building for weeks. He left shortly after, without a word about what happened, but the damage was done. That brief touch echoed in my skin for hours, keeping me awake long into the night. Lying in bed, I pressed my hand against the same spot as if trying to hold on to the ghost of his touch. I couldn't hide from the truth anymore. I didn't just want attention. I wanted him. The next time we crossed paths, it was impossible to pretend otherwise. The way he looked at me carried a question, and the way I smiled back was my answer. Our conversations became layered, charged with subtext. He'd make remarks that were harmless on paper, but delivered with a tone that made my pulse quicken. I found myself replying with the same edge, feeding the fire I claimed I wanted to put out. Soon, the secrecy extended beyond casual run-ins. We began texting, something I justified at first as neighborly friendliness. But our messages quickly grew more personal, more revealing. Late at night, when my husband was asleep, I'd read his words under the covers, feeling a rush of adrenaline with every notification. Compliments about how I looked, subtle admissions about how often he thought of me. It was no longer innocent. I was no longer innocent. The first physical crossing happened quietly, naturally, as if we both knew it was inevitable. One afternoon, I dropped something by the fence, and when I bent to pick it up, he was suddenly there, close enough for his shoulder to brush mine. I straightened too quickly, and he steadied me with his hand at my waist. That simple touch was enough to undo every defense I had left. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let myself lean into it, breathing in the closeness, savoring the forbidden thrill of his fingers pressing lightly against me. It escalated from there in small increments, each moment pushing us further than the last. A hand brushing against mine longer than necessary. His fingers grazing my arm when no one else could see. A hug that lingered just a heartbeat too long. By the time he finally pressed his lips against mine in a rushed, desperate kiss, it felt less like a betrayal of vows and more like the inevitable conclusion of a story we had been writing word by word. The kiss shattered everything. It was reckless, hungry, filled with the kind of passion I hadn't felt in years. My body betrayed me completely, responding without hesitation, without thought. For those few seconds, I forgot everything else. My marriage, the risks, the guilt. All I could feel was the raw intensity of being wanted, truly wanted, by someone who couldn't hide it. When we pulled apart, breathless, neither of us spoke. There was no need. What had been unspoken for weeks was finally out in the open. My lips tingled, my chest heaved, and all I could think was that I had crossed the very line I swore I wouldn't. I was no longer standing at the edge of temptation. I had leapt into it headfirst. I walked back into my house with trembling hands, heart pounding, and a truth I could no longer escape. This wasn't just a harmless game anymore. This was real, dangerous, and I wanted more. After that first kiss, there was no going back. The secrecy became the glue that held us together, pulling us deeper with every hidden exchange. What started as lingering touches and stolen moments turned into something fuller, riskier. We both knew the danger, but that was exactly what made it impossible to resist. Each message, each glance across the driveway, each excuse to talk became another step down a path I couldn't turn away from. I started living two lives. On the surface, I was the same partner, going through the routines of cooking, cleaning, and pretending everything was fine. Beneath that mask, I was someone else entirely. Restless, exhilarated, reckless. My phone became a lifeline, a secret portal into the connection I craved. We texted constantly, weaving a thread of intimacy that stretched through every part of my day. He would tell me when he was thinking of me, how I crossed his mind when he shouldn't let me, how he wished he could have more than the small pieces I gave. I responded with the same intensity, confessing how alive he made me feel. It didn't take long before messages weren't enough. The hunger for each other demanded more. Every time we crossed paths, our restraint weakened. A brush of his hand on my back, when no one was looking. His lips brushing against mine in quick, hidden kisses behind closed doors. The adrenaline was intoxicating, my heart racing at the sound of footsteps, the fear of being caught tangled perfectly with the pleasure of being wanted so desperately. It was the rush of danger combined with the heat of passion, and it left me addicted. At home, I became a better liar than I ever imagined. I crafted excuses without hesitation, covered my tracks with practiced precision, and smiled like nothing was wrong. My husband seemed oblivious, lost in his routines, unaware that every word I said carried a double meaning in my mind. I would sit at dinner with him while replaying the memory of my neighbor's lips on mine just hours earlier. I would crawl into bed beside him, still tasting someone else's breath. The duplicity gnawed at me, but the thrill of my secret burned hotter than my guilt. The affair wasn't just physical, it was emotional in ways that scared me. He listened when I spoke about my frustrations, about feeling invisible, about the loneliness I carried inside my marriage. His responses were validating, affirming, exactly what I had longed to hear. He told me I was beautiful, vibrant, irresistible, words I hadn't heard from my husband in years. Every compliment, every confession tightened the bond between us. It wasn't only my body he had claimed, it was my mind, my emotions, my sense of self. Yet with every step deeper, the lies became harder to maintain. I found myself making up reasons to leave the house, inventing errands that didn't exist, creating windows of time that belonged only to us. I deleted messages obsessively, checked over my shoulder constantly, and lived in a constant state of vigilance. One wrong move, one overlooked detail, and everything could collapse. But even as the risk grew, my desire outweighed it. I wasn't ready to let it go. There were moments of clarity, brief flashes when guilt stabbed hard enough to make me want to stop. I would look at my husband, think about the vows I had broken, and wonder what kind of person I had become. But then my phone would buzz, his name lighting up the screen, and all those thoughts would scatter like dust. The pull was stronger than reason. The guilt never disappeared, but it dulled beneath the thrill, drowned out by the way he made me feel like the center of someone's world again. Our encounters escalated into something more deliberate. No longer just accidents or fleeting touches, we planned around stolen hours, carving out time where none should have existed. The secrecy made each meeting more intense, every second more precious. We knew it couldn't last forever, but neither of us was willing to end it. The risk was part of the addiction. I began noticing subtle changes in myself, how I dressed, how I carried myself, how I looked in the mirror. I felt bolder, more alive, as though I had been reborn into someone younger, freer, reckless in ways I hadn't dared to be in years. He fed that version of me, encouraged it, craved it, and I let him, willingly surrendering parts of myself I never thought I'd give away. But with passion came paranoia. Every unexpected glance from my husband made my stomach twist with fear of discovery. Every innocent question felt loaded, every silence charged with suspicion, even if none existed. I became hyper-aware of everything, living in a constant state of anticipation, bracing for the moment when the truth would finally break through the surface. The anxiety was exhausting, yet it was always counterbalanced by the euphoria of being desired. I knew I was building a house of cards, fragile and doomed, but I kept stacking it higher, convinced that somehow I could keep it standing. Lies became normal, deceit became survival, and the person I had been before seemed like a distant memory. I had crossed too many lines to ever go back. The more time we spent together, the harder it became to separate fantasy from reality. I started wondering what it would be like if I left everything behind, if I chose him openly instead of in secret. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. I wasn't ready to make that leap, but the fact that I entertained it at all showed how far gone I already was. Every night, as I lay in bed next to the man I had promised my life to, my mind wandered elsewhere. I imagined hands that weren't his, lips that weren't his, whispers that belonged to someone else. My heart pounded with the weight of betrayal, but even heavier was the undeniable truth. I didn't want to stop. The affair had consumed me. It was no longer a question of whether I would resist temptation. It was a question of how long I could keep the lie alive before it shattered everything around me. And even knowing the risk, even feeling the weight of guilt pressing against my chest, I still chose him every chance I got. The weight of secrets never truly disappears. It only grows heavier with time. At first, I convinced myself I could juggle everything, that the lies would protect me, that no one would ever notice. But lies have a way of bleeding into the smallest cracks, and soon I was living in constant anticipation of the collapse. Every innocent question felt like a trap, every glance like a test, and I knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. My husband started to notice changes. though he never said it outright. He asked why I seemed distracted, why my phone was always near me, why I sometimes smiled at nothing. I brushed off his concerns with easy excuses, but his suspicion was growing, even if he didn't voice it directly. And in those moments, guilt surged, burning sharper than ever before. I told myself I needed to stop, that I couldn't keep risking everything for a thrill. But when faced with the choice, I couldn't let go. I had already given too much of myself away. The affair no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a second life, running parallel to the one I was supposed to be living. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered confession was intoxicating, but it was also a reminder of how precarious everything had become. He started pressing for more, hinting at the possibility of us being together openly. The thought thrilled me and terrified me at the same time. I couldn't imagine the fallout of walking away from my marriage, yet part of me longed for the freedom of no longer hiding. The cracks began to show in ways I couldn't control. I slipped up on small details, hesitated too long when asked simple questions, and carried myself differently without realizing it. Even if no one else saw, I knew I was unraveling. The thrill that once fueled me was turning into fear. I still wanted him, desperately, but I also wanted to keep my world intact, and those two desires could not exist together forever. The turning point came when my husband looked at me one night with an expression I hadn't seen in years, an expression not of suspicion, but of hurt. He didn't accuse me of anything.
He didn't ask outright.
But the silence between us spoke volumes. For the first time, I saw the consequences of my choices reflected back at me. I realized I had been so consumed with being noticed by someone else that I had stopped noticing the damage I was doing to the person who had once given me everything. That night, I lay awake wrestling with the truth. I couldn't undo what I had done. I couldn't erase the memories, the feelings, the betrayals. But I could choose what came next. Ending it with him felt like tearing away a part of myself, but I knew the longer I continued, the worse the fallout would be. I had to choose between the fire of desire and the fragile remnants of the life I had built. Neither option felt right, but I knew indecision was its own kind of destruction. When I finally told him it had to end, his reaction was quiet, almost resigned. He didn't beg, didn't fight, didn't make promises. He only looked at me with the same intensity he always had and said he hoped I knew what I was walking away from. His words haunted me long after, echoing in the quiet moments when my phone no longer lit up with secret messages, when my days returned to the dull predictability I had once despised. The aftermath was brutal. The silence was heavier than the lies had ever been. I missed him more than I wanted to admit, missed the way he made me feel alive, wanted, cherished. I missed the adrenaline, the thrill, the escape. But beneath the longing was a sense of relief I hadn't expected. The constant fear of being caught began to fade, replaced by a different kind of emptiness, one that forced me to face myself without distraction. Living with the choices I made has been harder than making them in the first place. There are moments I look at my husband and wonder if he knows more than he lets on, if he's chosen silence over confrontation. There are other moments when I think he doesn't suspect a thing, and that somehow hurts more. I see the man I betrayed, the man who once loved me fiercely, and I wonder if I've destroyed something that can never be repaired. The truth is, infidelity doesn't end cleanly. It doesn't vanish when the affair stops. It lingers, etched into the spaces between words, into the way you look at yourself in the mirror, into the way you question every gesture from the person you promised to love. It leaves scars you can't confess and memories you can't erase. And the cruelest part is knowing that for all the passion and intensity, the affair didn't fix anything. It only revealed the fractures I had been trying to ignore. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to how it began. A skirt I hadn't worn in years, a glance that lingered too long, a moment that seemed harmless until it wasn't. I wonder if things could have been different if I had walked away then, if I had chosen to confront the emptiness in my marriage instead of filling it with someone else. But those are questions with no answers, only regrets. What I know is this: temptation doesn't come crashing in. It seeps quietly into the cracks of dissatisfaction until it takes root. And once it does, it's harder to pull out than anyone admits. I let myself be swept away by it, and now I live with the consequences. I can't undo the lies, the stolen moments, the betrayal. I can only carry them with me, a reminder of what happens when desire outweighs reason. I don't know what the future holds for my marriage. Maybe it will survive, maybe it won't. But I do know I will never be the same. The affair changed me, exposed me, broke parts of me I didn't even realize were fragile. And though I ended it, pieces of it still live in me. The thrill, the guilt, the longing, the shame. Those things don't disappear. They linger, forever tied to the choices I made when I let myself cross the line.